All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the seriously fascinating and sometimes pretty complex relationship between sin, religious laws, and grace, exactly as it's outlined in our source text.
So, right off the bat, how would you define sin? Modern society kind of just dismisses it as, well, an inescapable part of human nature, right? But our source text takes a radically different view. It actually identifies sin as the ultimate obstructer to a close relationship with God. It argues that sin doesn't just happen, it actively deceives and consumes us.
To unpack all this theology step by step, we're going to follow this quick roadmap. We'll look at the ultimate barrier, the real purpose of the law, how the law and the gospel interact, what it means to actually know God and do His will, and we'll wrap it all up with a pretty amazing story of faithfulness.
Starting us off with Section 1, the ultimate barrier, focusing on distractions and temptations. The text contrasts two very distinct ways humans handle our daily battles with temptation. On one side, you've got Samson. He fell hard because he depended entirely on his own strength. It was pure self-reliance, and honestly, it led straight to failure. But on the flip side, look at Jesus. The text points out that despite facing intense, unrelenting daily pressures, he overcame them. How? Not by relying on himself, but by actually withdrawing to pray and relying totally on the Father.
So, what do these temptations actually look like in real life? Well, the text zeroes in on some specific strongholds: hypocrisy, lust, unfair judgment, hating our enemies, and just, unjustified anger. And the author makes a crucial point here. These aren't just minor character flaws. No, they are massive roadblocks. They literally drain our time, sap our energy, and completely sever our relationship with God.
Which begs the question, how do we even recognize these strongholds? And that brings us to Section 2, the purpose of the law and seeing clearly.
The text uses a really fascinating analogy here. Because sin is so deeply tangled up in human nature, the author suggests we can't always spot it on our own. So rather than seeing God's law as this heavy, burdensome list of don'ts, we should look at it like a pair of glasses, or maybe a mirror. It's simply an illuminating tool designed to bring clarity, showing us exactly what sin really is and what we actually look like.
Building on that, the text emphasizes that the Ten Commandments are actually meant to act as a safeguard. Think about it. They hang entirely on just two foundational commands: loving God and loving your neighbor. When you view it through that specific lens, the text totally reframes the law. It goes from being rigid legalism into a beautifully simple framework of love and freedom.
And that reframing leads perfectly into Section 3, the law and the gospel, looking at condemnation and justification.
To explain how these work hand in hand, the text highlights this quote from Jesus in John 14:15. "If you love me, you will obey my commandments." The core argument here is that believers who genuinely love Jesus will feel naturally compelled to keep His law. They act out of a willing, responsive love, not because they're being crushed by some legalistic burden.
But the source makes a super vital distinction right here. It argues that while the law is an absolutely necessary mirror to point out our need for forgiveness, it only condemns. It never actually forgives. It is the gospel, specifically Christ's substitutionary death, that forgives, justifies, and atones. In the author's view, think of it like this: the law diagnoses the disease, but only the gospel provides the cure.
All right, moving into the application phase with Section 4, knowing God, doing His will, and going beyond just words.
The source points us to a pretty stark warning from the Sermon on the Mount. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven." It's a heavy reminder from the text that having mere intellectual knowledge about God is essentially useless unless it translates into an active, obedient relationship where His will is actually getting done.
So how exactly does the text say we achieve that? Well, the source lays out a very straightforward three-step procedure. Step 1, you have to accept the blueprint by faith. Step 2, claim the perfect righteousness of Christ. And step 3, you have to actively live out that righteousness in your everyday life.
To really anchor all this high-level theology in reality, let's look at Section 5, a story of faithfulness, or what we'll call the ATM miracle. The text shares this honestly mind-boggling story about a 19-year-old Brazilian student named Tarsis Gomes. Now, Tarsis received a fixed monthly allowance from his father of exactly 50 Brazilian real. To put that in perspective, that was equivalent to about $50 at the time. Because he was deeply committed to his faith, out of that 50, he faithfully dedicated 5 real straight to his tithe. And then he designated another 5 reals as a church offering.
So, doing the quick math, that left him with exactly 40 real. But shortly after, 2 of his friends approached him in serious need. Embodying that exact concept of loving his neighbor we talked about earlier, Tarsus promptly promised them 20 real each, literally giving away his remaining 40. But, there was a major problem. He completely forgot that he still desperately needed 23 real to cover his mandatory university fees.
A few days later, standing in an ATM line, he realizes his massive mistake and naturally begins praying in absolute distress. According to the story, he suddenly sensed the prompting to look up, and right there, sticking directly out of the machine's cash dispenser, was a 50 real banknote. Think about that. 3 people in front of him had somehow inexplicably missed it. Tarsus practically pulled the exact amount he needed right out of thin air.
Tarsus is actually a military police officer now, and he points back to this event as his own personal proof that faithfully applying God's law of love through our actions directly invites his provision. His quote here is great. "We do not become poor when we help people. God is the one who sustains us. Be faithful." For him, finding that exact 50 real beautifully replaced everything he had faithfully dedicated and given away to others.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this profound, lingering challenge directly from the source material. On the day of judgment, what will you rely on? Will it be your own strength and your own law-keeping, or will it be Jesus' perfect righteousness? It is the ultimate question of grace to reflect on. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next one.